This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, a multi-award-winning, truly independent boutique wealth manager. Invest better with Brenthurst.
Good. Thank you very much, everyone. You are the true heroes of the revolution for having stuck it out for 3 days in the cold, in the heat. You've been here when it mattered, and I'm very grateful that you're still here. So thank you very much for sticking it out. Over the last 3 days, we've heard some fantastic talks, and I want to bring together some key threads so we can assess what we've heard over the last few days. Over dinner yesterday, I learned a new word, Vouchers, which is the Afrikaans word for a roller coaster. And that is a good word for the mood at this conference. There's a tension between hope and gloom. But there's also a second tension that I've detected at this conference, and that is the tension over what to do and what you can do. So let me address those two tensions in turn. We'll begin with the state of the country. Has South Africa turned the corner? A few weeks ago, the finance minister told South Africans that we had reached an important turning point in the management of our public finances. The budget review used similar language. It said the economy's recovery was starting to gain traction. And that, in a sentence, is the mood of the moment. South Africa, we are told, is turning a corner. Now, at a conference like this, among investors and business people and people who have sat through 3 days of analysis, that claim is going to get one of two responses. Some people will say, at last, and others will say, not so fast. And I want to suggest that both responses are partly right. At the superficial level, the case for optimism is easy to make. Our bond yields have come down from around 11% at the time of the 2024 election to around 8.5% now, and they even dipped below 8% in February before the hostilities kicked off in the Middle East. Business confidence has improved from 109 points when the Government of National Unity was formed in June 2024 to 131 points in January, and that is the latest number available. That's the Saki Business Confidence Index. We've just received the latest GDP growth figures, 1.1% for 2025, and that means a doubling of the 0.5% that we recorded in 2024. National Treasury now expects the economy to grow at 1.6% next year and with a 1.8% average over the next 3 years. And that sounds like growth is accelerating. The inflation target has been lowered to 3% with a plus minus 1 percentage point tolerance band. Load shedding dropped sharply from March 2024 and was suspended in May 2025. The GNU has proved more durable than many expected. Now, many people were expecting it to collapse every few months, but it's still around, it's still there. And there is at least some continued movement, however halting, towards greater private participation in electricity, ports, and rail. So if you wanted to make the bullish cocktail party case, you could do it in one breath. The fiscus is stabilizing. Reform is inching forward. Inflation is lower. Business confidence is up. And South Africa is finally behaving like a normal emerging market again. But that is precisely where the caution must begin, because none of that on its own means South Africa has turned the corner in the sense that really matters. An economy growing at 1.1% is not turning the corner. It is limping less badly. An economy growing at 2% is not turning the corner either. Frankly, even 3% would not be enough to repair the social and economic damage South Africa has accumulated over many years. The deeper problem here is that our fixed investment rate remains far too low. The IRR's latest growth strategy paper makes the point bluntly. South Africa has been stuck in a low-growth rut for over a decade. In inflation-adjusted terms, so in real terms, fixed investment fell from 775 billion rand in 2008 to 660 billion rand in 2024. And as share of GDP, it fell from 21.6% to 14.5% over the same period. And just to remind ourselves what fixed investment is. So fixed investment is all the money that gets invested in things like roads, rail, dams, factories, shopping malls, buildings, so all the stuff that you make out of concrete and bricks and steel that you can't move easily. That's why it's fixed. It's fixed in one place. South Africa's rate, 14.5%. The global average is 26%. And emerging markets are often over 30%. So we are like miles away from where we need to be as a country in terms of our fixed investment. We are not building roads, we're not building rail, we're not building ports, we're not building dams, we're not building factories, we're not building buildings enough. We have to do far more of that. And without a decisive rise in capital formation, we are not going to get the growth, jobs, or income gains that we need. The same paper, so that's the IRR's Blueprint for Growth paper, the first one, argues that if South Africa is to generate around 900,000 net new jobs a year, we will ultimately need real GDP growth of roughly 6 to 8%. And we're at 1.1%. So 6 to 8%, that is what serious escape velocity looks like. And everything else is drift with a better press release. We should be aware of another South African habit, and that is mistaking a tailwind for a turnaround. Commodity prices move in our favor. The rand firms, gold runs hot, platinum has a moment, and suddenly we begin talking about national renewal. But a country that depends on a good external cycle to feel good has not turned the corner. It has simply enjoyed the weather. Treasury itself says that faster reform in electricity, transport, and water is what would unlock materially higher investment and growth. In other words, even the optimists in government know that the current uplift is not enough. So that is the superficial level. There's some real improvement and it should not be dismissed, but it should also not be confused with a durable shift in South Africa's trajectory. But now let me move to the deeper level because this is where things become much more interesting. To understand whether a country is really turning the corner, you have to look beneath the market mood and ask a far more fundamental question. Are the politics beginning to align with the values and priorities of voters? Are the politics beginning to align with the values and priorities of voters? Because if they do, then policy can change. And if policy can change, investment can rise. If investment can rise, then growth can become self-sustaining rather than cyclical and borrowed. And this is where some genuinely significant things are happening. There are small signs, and you must look out for the small signs. Let me start with something that caught my eye last week. News 24. For many years, one of the country's most important agenda-setting platforms ran a strikingly critical piece on BEE under the headline, BEE and EE, so that's Black Economic Empowerment and Employment Equity, criminalize cronyism, focus on the poor. So that piece argued that while BEE helped deracialize ownership and create a black upper and middle class, it had fallen short of meaningfully reducing poverty for the majority, and that corruption, rent-seeking, and fronting had distorted its effects. And it's, to us, very surprising to read this because this sounds like what we say in many ways. The criticisms that the IRR has been making of Black economic empowerment and employment equity over many, many years, for which we've been derided and criticisms that have been dismissed, are now being picked up by a mainstream outlet like News 24. And that is a serious crack in a long-standing elite consensus. That's an important signal. Why does it matter? Because for years, South Africa's mainstream debate allowed criticism of outcomes, but not criticism of core policy architecture. So you could say crime is bad. You could say corruption is bad. You could say government service delivery is bad. But once you started asking whether race-based laws, procurement premiums, or empowerment structures were themselves part of the problem, the room used to go cold. That room is no longer as cold as it was. And this tells us something important about the role of institutions like the IRR. A serious think tank is not supposed to be a comfort blanket. It is supposed to be a mirror, an early warning system, and sometimes a pebble in your shoe. It is supposed to be out of step with its moment when its moment is wrong. And the IRR has often found itself in this position. It has done this for a very long time. It has been publishing the South Africa Survey, which is a compendium of statistics about the country running to 700 to 800 pages every single year since 1947. The IRR has existed since 1929, so we are heading towards our centenary in 2029. It opposed race laws under apartheid, and it opposes race-based laws now. Often that has meant being early, and often that has meant being unfashionable, even unpopular, But in democratic societies, that is often exactly the job of a think tank. Now let's look at the polling. So the 2024 election was a structural break. ANC dominance was broken. For the first time in democratic South Africa, the governing party was forced into power sharing at national level. And of course, that did not guarantee any reforms, and as a matter of fact, serious reform has been seriously lacking. But the loss of ANC dominance has changed the political mathematics. Opinion polling since the 2024 election suggests that the old political equilibrium, where the ANC called all the shots, is not coming back. Polling which we did between March and April last year found the DA on 30.3% among registered voters and the ANC on 29.7%. That's the first time, as far as we know, that in any national poll ever, the ANC has not been the largest party, the number one ranked party. In this poll, there was a margin of error, so maybe the numbers are not exactly like that. That's the first time that the DA was higher than the ANC. That same poll also found that black support for the DA was rising from around 5% historically to 18% in this polling round. And that's a very important shift. Even the report's authors are careful about the provisional nature of the findings because the polling was done at the time of the VAT fight, and many voters like the party that opposes a tax increase. So you think that drew a lot of support to the DA at that specific moment. But even though these findings are provisional, it does seem that something has shifted. The second important finding is even more powerful. When South Africans are asked what actually matters to them, they do not answer the way much of our political class talks. In IRR polling, jobs and unemployment remain overwhelmingly the top priority, as has been the case for the past 10, 15, 20 years. No wonder with 30, 40% unemployment. No other issue comes close. The report says job creation is the top issue across 27 of 28 respondent breakdowns. So you break the respondents down by race, by income, by education, by where they live, by which political party they support, but 27 out of 28 of those categories say the most important thing that we care about, the most important issue that we want the government to address is jobs and unemployment. The same report also notes the relative unimportance as voter priorities of issues like inequality, racism, healthcare, and land reform compared with jobs. And that is a massive gap between elite fixation and popular concern. When voters are asked what sort of policy they prefer, the answers become even more awkward for the current order. So we ask, for example, should the government focus more on raising employment or expanding welfare? Like, do you want more jobs or do you want more social grants? 77.8% chose job creation and 19.9% prefer higher grants. When we ask people, how do you think the state should spend money? And just to remind you, under the current system, the state overspends by design. That's written in the law, because a black-owned provider of goods or services to the government can charge a higher price and still get the award. And we call those BEE premiums. They mean that the state gets less value for the same money. And if you ask ordinary people, what do you think of this? 81.7% say the state should pick the best priced supplier. It's kind of obvious. Then we ask people whether vouchers for schooling, healthcare, and housing would help people get ahead more than the current affirmative action and BEE policies. We see 76.3% choose vouchers with support for the individual voucher ideas, so schooling, healthcare, or housing in the mid-80s. Among black respondents, nearly 4 out of 5 say vouchers would be more empowering than affirmative action or BEE. Among ANC supporters, 77.3% prefer vouchers to affirmative action or BEE. And this is not a fringe view. That is a democratic signal flare. In other words, the deeper story in South Africa is not yet that the economy has turned the corner. It is that the politics may slowly be starting to. And that is the real basis for conditional optimism. And I think, from the messages we heard over the last 3 days, that was one of the things you should have picked up. The enthusiasm that greeted Prince Mashela's announcement, for example. I think also the criticisms that Rob Hersov, repeatedly brings to these meetings. They show you that the politics really is shifting, though slowly, and that is a reason for optimism. Again, cast your mind a few years back to 2015 when Jacob Zuma was at the height of his powers, and it was very hard to see a way forward and out of the situation. Or think back to when the EFF and MK were, just rising in the polls all the time. That's not the case today. So because once politics begins to reflect voter priorities more honestly, then policy change becomes possible. And once policy change becomes possible, South Africa's upside is enormous. And I think that is sort of the driver of the optimism and the hope that we see in audiences like this. You get this feeling like there's this really big opportunity, but why can't we grasp it? So if we think about what needs to change to get the country working, I would put three things at the top of the list. Your mileage might vary. We've had a bit of law enforcement commentary, and I think that is very important. So that's not a point that I've got on this list, but I do agree it's very important. So first, I would say race-based laws. South Africa cannot become a high investment, high growth economy while clinging to a legal architecture that classifies, penalizes, distorts, and raises the cost of doing business. The IRR's No More Race Laws bill is a draft law that we've written, and that's deliberately blunt in its title because the problem is blunt in reality. The bill proposes repealing race-based statutory preferences, replacing them with a non-racial, merit-based approach that we call economic empowerment for the disadvantaged, or EED. And it also proposes ending the state's reliance on official race classification, which we've currently still got. Whether one agrees with every clause or not, the direction is clear: stop governing a future economy through the bureaucratic categories of the past. Second, property rights. Secure property rights are not a luxury good for the rich. They are the precondition for mass investment, urban development, small business formation, mortgage lending, and the broadening of ownership. And very important for the poor, especially. It's not just wealthy people who want to protect their stuff. If you have very little, it's even more important that you should be able to keep it. Here, the IRR's right to own bill is not only about repealing expropriation without compensation, it is also about title deeds, housing vouchers, faster registration, use of underutilized state land, and stronger law enforcement against unlawful occupation and corruption. It is about turning property from a source of fear into a platform for growth. Third, value for money and state capability. South Africa bleeds growth not only through ideology but through waste. The IRR's value for money bill would make value for money the decisive standard in procurement, prohibit points-based award systems that undermine it, require transparent publication of reasons for awards, and put speed and payment discipline back into the system. And again, whether you support every detail or not, the principle is right. Poor South Africans do not benefit when the state overpays politically connected suppliers. They pay for it. These proposals sit within a broader framework. The IRR's growth strategy paper argues for 4 linked moves: increase direct investment, so we've spoken about fixed investment, rebuild infrastructure, draw millions more into the labor market, and broaden economic participation in ways that actually work. It's a program grounded in the simple proposition that South Africa must become a country that produces more, builds more, hires more, and trusts its citizens more. If we do those things, then yes, South Africa becomes a serious candidate for strong capital inflows, not because investors are sentimental or because they owe us anything, but because the country has real assets. It's got great location, a big mineral endowment, deep capital markets, substantial private sector capabilities, good parts of an institutional inheritance, entrepreneurial talent, and a population that is still, for all the damage done, hungry for progress. The missing ingredient is not potential, it is permission. Permission through policy for South Africa to work. And that brings me to the final risk, and perhaps the most insidious one, and that is despondency. Ipsos found in September 2025 that 80% of South Africans thought the country was heading in the wrong direction. 80%. A Brenthurst Foundation survey found 70% saying the same, and that kind of pessimism affects consumption, investment, risk appetite, social trust, and national ambition. It tells people not to build, not to stay, not to try, not to believe. And I'm almost running out of time, but I'm almost there, Alec. And yet, despondency can become a form of vanity. It allows us to sit back and say, I knew it, this place is hopeless. But countries are not rescued by people who are merely correct about decline. They are rescued by people who are prepared to fight for a different outcome. People like you, the people in this room. So this brings us to what can you do? Firstly, you can register to vote and encourage all of your friends to do so, and then go and make your mark on election day. Don't be complacent about this. Don't have a braai or go on holiday or think I'm in a safe DA ward, my vote doesn't matter. You've got to go out and vote. Like every single one of those votes does count. In Mngeni, we heard, I think, on 2 days ago on Tuesday, the DA won an absolute majority with 42 votes. So it's important that you do this. Second, speak up. And this has been a recurring theme at this conference. I know it's hard for businesses to do so, but they should not underestimate the impact of a statement like, for example, yes, we comply with BEE because the law forces us to, but we do so under duress. BEE is harming our business and it is harming the economy. We are investing less and creating fewer jobs because of it. We find it abhorrent to classify our employees by race. We do not support this kind of fake transformation. And that kind of statement, I think, would be very important. We see just recently the government on X, I think, utilizing BMW to poke fun at the United States and saying BMW complies with all the BEE rules. They don't have a problem. They're investing. Why are the Americans so upset? Why is Bozell criticizing BEE laws? But BMW is being instrumentalized here. And they're not saying what they think necessarily. Third, give your financial support to the organizations that place themselves in the line of fire to rescue South Africa. Support the political parties that have sane economic policies and that are meritocratic. Very simple. And support the civil society organizations that fight every day against harmful policies like the IRR and many other great organizations that we have heard from at this conference. So coming back to my initial question, has South Africa turned the corner at the superficial level? Not yet. Some indicators have improved. We should welcome that, but it's still too little, too fragile, and too dependent on conditions we do not control. At the deeper level, perhaps yes. Not economically yet. Politically, potentially. We may be beginning to see the slow emergence of a South Africa in which voter priorities start disciplining political behavior. If that continues, policy can change. And if the policy changes, investment can rise. If investment goes up, growth can accelerate. And if growth accelerates, then this country can surprise the world very quickly. And that is the conditional optimism I would leave you with tonight. South Africa is not a lost cause, but it is not a self-saving cause either. It will require argument. It will require courage and institutions willing to tell the truth before it is fashionable. That is part of what the IRR tries to do through its polling, its blueprint for growth papers, its freedom bills, and its broader What SA Can Be campaign. So my message to you is simple. Do not confuse green shoots with a harvest, but also do not miss the significance of the political opening that may be emerging. If we use it well, and if we win the policy argument, if we move from anti-growth dogma to pro-growth reform, then South Africa will not merely have turned the corner, it will begin to run. And that is a country worth backing. Thank you.
This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, a multi-award winning, truly independent boutique wealth manager. Invest better with Brenthurst.